Welcome to Author Talk. Tonight at Blue Cottage Agency, we are so delighted you are here. This is the first Author Talk of the year, and we are so excited to welcome E. Joe Brown and Ed Massey to tonight's discussion. We have two great books we're going to be talking about this evening. E. Joe Brown's book, Cowboy's Destiny, with a beautiful cover, and Ed Massey's book, Forever Sheriff, which is a part of a series. And we have Ed coming to us from Connecticut and Joe coming to us from New Mexico. And I, of course, am in Minnesota. And we're going to get started here. I'm going to introduce the authors. So Ed Massey was born with a love of the West, and it grew. His books are about the West, the working man, and the glory of facing every day. He's the author of 5 books. He's a member of Western Writers of America, Western Fictioneers, Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, and the League of Utah Writers. Edward and his wife Anne live in Connecticut, where he writes every day. He'll never move back west, but that is all right. He never left. For more information, you can visit his website, edwardmasseybooks.com. His book, Forever Sheriff, is the chronological 3rd book in the endcap of the High Mountain Sheriff series. It follows Deputy Mark Sims, determined upholder of the law as Summit County's 3rd Sheriff Sims. The book is published by 5 Star. And E. Joe Brown, he writes historical fiction and memoirs, now writing in his retirement from careers in the USAF military and civil service careers, and as a senior analyst advising the commander, USAF Flight Tester Center. He's a member of Southwest Writers, Western Writers of America, Military Writers of America, and several other nonprofit organizations. Joe will be coming to us live from New Mexico. And for more information, you can visit Joe at ejoebrown.com. And Destiny is the first book in his series that will follow his journey of chasing those dreams. The book is published by Artemesia, Cowboy's Destiny, and it's a historical fiction novel set in a period of transition in the American West. So welcome, authors. Super delighted you're here. And I'm going to hand it over to Joe, and Joe is going to discuss Ed's book. Thanks, Joe and Ed.
All right. Just so glad that we could be here tonight, and I'm sure Ed will echo that. Ed, I'm looking forward to talking about Forever Sheriff. I absolutely enjoyed learning about the Sims, and I'd like you to start off by giving us some background on the inspiration for the storyline itself in Forever Sheriff, and the inspiration for the characters. And I'll turn it over to you. Ed, what do you think?
Well, great. I'd love to do that. I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story behind the story, as well as get to the book. One of my books, the second one that was published, Every Soul is Free, I've sort of carried around for a long time because my grandfather got up from the Thanksgiving table when I was 6 years old and never returned. And Every Soul is Free is about the sheriff who is called out because somebody escaped and he never returned. When I got to 5 Star as a publisher, I wanted that to be the 3rd in the line of 3 stories for a trilogy. They did not want to do that because it had already been published by another publisher. I bought the rights, but it had been published by another publisher. And they wanted me to write a completely new story. So Forever Sheriff is the same sheriff 40 years earlier as Every Soul is Free, but he is the 3rd sheriff in the line of the Sheriff Sims of Summit County. Summit County is where my mother's family settled after crossing the plains as Mormon pioneers. The founding sheriff, Sheriff Luke Sims, was trained as apprenticed as a cooper, which was what my great-great-grandfather was in England before he emigrated for the church. So what happened was we started with a series of real family characters and created a lot of stories that were a combination of actual stories that happened in Summit County or stories that happened to the family and turned that into fiction. Forever Sheriff then became the third of these. So the founding sheriff was Luke Sims. The fugitive sheriff was John Sims. And this sheriff for Forever Sheriff is Mark Sims. And the reason that it was Luke, John, and Mark is that Luke loved the book of Matthew. So that made Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the story begins in 1905. And there was a little bit of a writing issue here because it was going to be a book about a sheriff. But in 1905, the man who became a deputy in 1905 was 18. So it had to start with him as a deputy and carrying on for several years. As a matter of fact, from 1905 to 1918, he served as deputy to his father, John, and there are lots of adventures. And then in 1918, upon his father's death, he not only became sheriff, but became in charge of the county's response to the Spanish flu. As it turns out, that little town, Colville, Utah, was in fact the hardest hit by the Spanish flu, even though it was a teeny little town. It just happened to be in the crossroads from Wyoming down to Salt Lake. So, you know, travelers and people who were carrying the disease were going through the town all the time. And that made for a great setting because, ironically, the story was written. I mean, it takes years to write a book, as you well know. And then guess what we had in 2020? I mean, my God, we had COVID. And that blended in with some of my own personal thoughts about how to respond to COVID. And one of the scenes in Forever Sheriff is where his grandmother, one of the remaining pioneers, tells him how to deal with this crisis that he's now in charge of. And it's basically, you know, don't get sick, don't make anybody else sick, and don't bend the rules. And so that was kind of his approach, which was people need to take care of themselves. They need to make damn sure they don't hurt anybody else, and then they can't waver from it. So that was a part of the book that was very much driven by what was going on then, but it happened to coincide by serendipity with reality. And then the ending came in the book because all of the pioneers died. I mean, they were gone, and now we're into the 20th century, and he has to be forever the sheriff, even though we're now in the 20th century and we're on cars. As a matter of fact, in this book, there is the transition from being a police department or sheriff's office on horses to a sheriff's office, you know, on cars. And it was an interesting process to go through dealing with that transition. You asked me earlier about whether or not there were real characters in there in the book as well. And, you know, yes, there were, because there were interesting historic things going on. At the time, the first effort to set a speed record on Bonneville Salt Flats took place. And so I created a scene where Sheriff John, Mark's father, really became interested in speed and salt flats and stuff like that. And so it was fun bringing the two together. And in this instance, in this book, Mark survives, Mark remains, and the story ends.
Well, I tell you, I really enjoyed following the family. As we will end up talking about my novel a little later, people are going to find that we kind of did some similar things in our books, and I think that's cool.
Yeah.
As you wrote Forever Sheriff, and you could even apply this to previous if you like, but I know as I wrote my novel, my character spoke to me, and sometimes my character surprised me. and I sure thought my character would have done this, but my character did that. So I'm just curious, Ed, as you've written, has a character or characters in this book or any previous book ever just surprised you how things turned out?
Yeah, I've heard that question a lot, and a lot of authors have answered it. Didn't have that experience so much. These were, I was trying to keep up with these men. These were all lean, hard men who spoke 3 words when 3 paragraphs would have been just as good. And so it was a matter of living up to them. And, you know, in that effort, I wasn't able to keep track of, you know, surprises. So they may have been there, I just didn't notice them.
Well, I can appreciate that. I do know that storylines as well as characters sometimes take a twist that you just didn't see coming, but you follow it, and dadgummit, that's where it needed to go, or that's what needed to happen. So I understand.
I understand that about storylines. I'll give you an example from Founding Sheriff, which was about the first murder in the county and how the sheriff had to create a justice system in order to be able to get the murderer convicted, because he was the first sheriff. He was the founding sheriff. So I wanted to find out what was the name of the officer, the prosecuting attorney for a county in 1865. So I called up the county and the county attorney's office, and I asked that question. They did not know the answer to the question, but what they said is that, you know, we had our own murder here in town, and vigilantes took care of it. Well, I didn't know that, and immediately put it in the story because it was such a rich piece of history.
Don't you love it when that happens? I tell you.
Just a surprise.
Well, a question that I really would love to have asked you offline, and I'll ask it here just because I'm sure it'll be interesting to everybody. As we go through our growth as writers, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, or whether we're even like a writer on a newspaper, wherever you're writing, from time to time, you get good advice. What would you say is the best advice that you ever got as it applies to your writing?
Oh, there's no question. Somebody whom I revere because he has been an enormous help to me is John Nesbitt. And I met him the first time at a Western Writers of America convention in Las Vegas. And he said, the most important thing is just keep showing up. And, you know, so it's a little bit like the Woody Allen advice that success is 97% showing up, but it's really true. Just keep coming back. And, you know, a good book takes 2 years to get done. I've had a couple that took 4 or 5 years. So, you know, you just have to keep at it.
That's definitely true. I assume then, based on what you just said, that you have a typical day in the office, if you will. Do you have a best time of day or a best place or anything like that that seems to work for you?
Well, I'm a little bit hidebound in that regard. Aside from some emails, the first 4 hours of every day go to writing, and I sit here. I'm at my desk right now, and I write at my desk at my computer. Mm-hmm. For several years, that included Saturday and Sunday. During the COVID years, my wife came to me and said, you know, I really want us to make Saturday and Sunday different from the rest of the week. So that took a little effort, but now it is different because I don't write on Saturday and Sunday.
Well, I'm sure that there's a lot of us that would like to have your dedication. I remember distinctly when I was taking a class at UNM in writing that the teacher made the comment that you need to carve out some time every day to write. You need to put words on the page every day, even if it's only 10 words. It needs to happen every day. And the grumbles in the room were noticeable. And
no, I totally agree with that. And the other thing I would add that's always has interested me since I got started is that no matter how bad the stuff is that I'm writing today, tomorrow when I read it, it's not that bad.
Well, I find like you that I go back and look at something, and I may not go back and look at it the next day, but I go back and look at things, and I'll say, that wasn't bad. But
Right.
and I always have a but.
It's never as bad when you read it as it is when you're writing it.
Agreed, my friend. I totally agree. I also wanted to ask you what, as an author, you do to kind of share what you're planning, promoting, and executing some kind of successful book tour. Do you do book tours? And if not, what do you find that works best for you to expand your readership?
Oh, I'm a total failure. I'm writing about the high mountain west from Connecticut, and there aren't a lot of people, bookstores in Connecticut who are interested, and it's a long way out to Utah. So I haven't been very good at that, except with Fugitive Sheriff, where I lucked into some timing, and League of Utah Writers asked me to give a talk, and so I ended up having a few libraries and a few chapters of League of Utah Writers all linked together, and that was a lot of fun. I'm not sure that it sold very many books, maybe 10, but it was sure a lot of fun. And I'm still a complete novice at this in terms of promoting it and selling the books and everything. I'm trying, but I'm a novice.
Well, I know I've done a few since Destiny came out in August, and I will tell you, Ed, I have got so much out of just meeting the public and getting some level of feedback from them, that even if I didn't sell a ton of books, I ended up gaining a lot of just a lot. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to say any
totally
particular
agree.
thing.
I agree.
But feedback and just encouragement and so forth. But again, you make a absolutely good point. I don't know if those book tours would have happened if I was starting in Connecticut, starting in the Albuquerque metro and working my way through Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, Texas, and so forth.
That'd be nice.
That's a little easier to do.
Yeah.
I also am I got asked this recently, and so I'm gonna share this question with you because I ended up starting a good conversation. What is the best money you've invested in your literary career?
Well, it probably was the joining and keeping up with and going to when there were conferences or conventions, both with Western Writers of America and Western fictioneers. You know, I have a theory that it's really a lot of it is about what stream you're swimming in, just like fish in the stream. And those organizations and those events gave me an opportunity to, you know, meet people and interact with them. And 5-Star at the time was the best Western publisher. It's since destroyed itself, but at the time it was. And it took me 4 years before they were willing to take on one of my books. But, you know, I kept talking to them at the conferences and going back, and ultimately it worked.
Well, I have no idea if you would have asked me that, but I'd like to share with you that when I answered that, it was that I decided to take a shot at writing fiction and so forth in 2018, December of 2018. I went to a meeting that my daughter-in-law invited me to go to, and it was a meeting of writers. And I was introduced to someone that taught at UNM here, University of New Mexico, and she encouraged me to take some classes. In 2019, I took about 36 continuing education classes, and the money I spent there accelerated my understanding of what I needed to do, at least from a mechanical standpoint, and in some cases an inspirational standpoint to write. So, but I will tell you, a close second is my association with organizations and conferences. I completely can see where you would have said, you know, Western writers and Western fictioners and so forth. Those organizations are incredibly important, and I'm a member of Southwest Writers here, and the encouragement I get. But I tell you, I got such a wonderful jump start in an understanding of how to put a word on a page, and because I've always been a storyteller, but orally and putting it on the page, two different techniques, two different ways of doing it, and I really didn't understand that until I went to school.
Yeah, no, I didn't even think of that when you asked about money spent on it. I totally agree with you. I've gone to literally dozens of workshops and writing classes and stuff like that, but it kind of just feels like, you know, those are the dues, and they just went along with, you know, same as getting any kind of education. But you're absolutely right. It's very useful and very helpful. And one of the things that's most helpful about it is the people who are sitting around the table with you. You know, I remember the first time I was writing what became Every Soul is Free, and I said, you know, I'd sort of like to figure out how to do some marketing of this. And somebody at the table told me about a website that was specialized for locating places to publish short stories. And fast forward, I used the website. I had 7 short stories published out of that book, and one of the publishers became the publisher of the novel. So it was, you know, really just related to the fact that it was a workshop.
Isn't it amazing how that works out?
Yep.
My publisher is my publisher. I know because I contributed to an anthology that his publishing company was the publisher for, and that led to me meeting him and developing a relationship that led to him becoming my publisher. And you just never know when that's going to happen. And those organizations and those conferences and so forth that you can be part of can be invaluable.
Right.
And classes. I actually have some contacts from classes that will be in my life forever, you know.
Yep.
Well, I tell you, I could go on forever. I've got another list of questions here, but at some point in time, I think Miss Krista is going to want to step in and say, guys, you need to shut down. So is that true, Krista?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to shut you down. It's great to hear the conversation. But yes, we will turn it over to Ed to discuss Joe's book.
Super. Well, that's
Thanks, Ed.
good. Yeah, no, I look forward to that. I had mentioned to you, Joe, and I'll mention to who are watching that, you know, I have a kind of a preferred format for doing this. I'd like to actually have three themes. The first one is the story, your book and the story that is being told there. Second is the story behind the story. And then the third is about the writing and the writing process. In fact, we covered all of those things when we were talking about Forever Sheriff, but that's kind of how I'd like to organize it. On the subject of the story, I'd like to leave to you to give a bit of a synopsis or short summary of the story, but I want to observe that it struck me as though what it was an adventure romance with a journey filled full of obstacles in it, and you know, far away from a Western, it reminded me of the Odyssey and Odysseus. So, you know, with that background, tell us about the story of Charlie.
Well, I tell you what, it is a novel whose primary character is Charlie Kelly. And Charlie, when the book opens, he's a teenager, I guess probably in his mid-teens. But by the time the story really begins to take hold, he's about 19 years old in 1917. And one of the beautiful things that I enjoyed about your novel, as I'm telling this, is that our time periods kind of overlap.
Yeah.
You know, you start earlier, but you certainly toward the end are overlapping into the time period that I wrote about. Exactly. Charlie is a mature teenager. He is a high school graduate, valedictorian of his class, although it's a small town in eastern part of the state of New Mexico called Fort Sumner. But he's a native Oklahoman like me, and eventually decides that he needs to strike out on his own. He's tired of cleaning up messes of friends and family, including his own dad. And he says, he tells his brother, I want to be a top hand at the 101 ranch in northern Oklahoma. To work at the Miller's 101 would be like working in heaven. And that sets the stage early on in the book. And we follow Charlie migrating through Oklahoma, meeting a young lady that will eventually become his wife later on. And I won't go into the details of that because I want that to be a little bit of the mystery. But anyway, he does end up working his way through a couple of ranches and a mercantile on his way to the 101, and he's hired on and does become depended on, a top hand at the 101, and along the way he's deals with several different challenges, but that's basically it. The story wraps up with how Charlie and Susan end up getting back together, because around mid-story they go their separate ways, although they stay in touch, and that's part of the story. But
well,
it is.
Yeah, I'm not going to breach your desire not to talk very much about it and keep it a mystery, but I do want to say that was a risky part of the story. That was risky storytelling. I thought that it was deftly handled.
Well, thank you.
On the cover, it says the Kelly Can Saga. Now, this can, is that the verb he is able to, or is that a last name?
No, that's a verb. And,
Okay.
and, Charlie Kelly is loosely based on my maternal grandfather, Clarence Ashley Kelly. And, he was, extremely, influential to me as a boy and as a young man. And, he told a story about something that happened to him out on the 101 ranch. And I'll just indicate it this way. There ended up being a problem. He more or less kept quiet, even though he knew he could probably be part of the solution. But his best buddy ended up hollering to the foreman, "Kelly can." And that story, I felt like I had to put it in the book.
Uh-huh.
So that ended up in the book, and my publisher said, "Hey, that could be the name of the saga, because this is going to be 3 to 5 books." At the point that I went on contract, Ed, I already had 400,000 words of this story written, and so we knew we had multiple novels that we could make out of it, and we've just kind of committed that we're going to create this series. So, but Kelly can is absolutely a verb.
And so is the second Kelly can already with the publisher and has a publication date?
It's with the publisher. He's just got it recently. I fully expect to get some feedback, some edits back probably this month, and we're targeting the end of the year.
Okay.
To have it out. 23. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
That's the goal.
That's super. Well, let's go on to the story behind the story for a minute. You actually did talk a little bit about this already, but it's family, and it's family versus fiction. Can you go into a little bit of the scene selection? How did you choose the family one to the non-family?
Absolutely, I can do that. I will tell you the bits and pieces of the story that are actually me recreating some of the stories of my family. My granddad Kelly and his family lived outside of Fort Sumner for a period of time. When he was, this is obviously before he ended up as a cowboy at the 101 ranch. So Charlie Kelly and Clarence Kelly, my grandfather, shared that, and as the story goes, what would have been my great granddaddy ended up shooting a guy. We always assumed it was in self-defense, but I never saw any documentation about that. But anyway, and the family ended up back in Oklahoma. So that's in the story. I'll just give that much away, that I did include that. My granddad did work in the oil fields later on in life after becoming a cowboy, and Charlie Kelly will end up in the oil business too. And so I drew from family history in a lot of ways. A couple of the stories out on the 101 ranch are actual stories that my granddaddy shared. I just adapted them in a way that they would fit the storyline that was in my mind about what became a cowboy's destiny. So I did absolutely interweave stories I heard from the lap of my granddaddy as a kid, and then I do want to emphasize the book is a work of fiction.
Yeah.
Charlie is not my granddad, but some of the things now. Charlie, as we go through the series for sure, and even in the first book here, you end up finding out that Charlie's is a man of character. Okay,
Yeah.
And I will tell you, my granddad Kelly, you could do a lot and say a lot to him. You might even discuss his heritage, but don't you ever call him a liar, because he would be on you like stink on a skunk. That his character and his truthfulness should just could never be questioned. So I try to portray Charlie somewhat like that. I wouldn't want to say he's as adamant about it as my granddad, but he certainly is like that.
Now, you mentioned, and the title of the book is A Cowboy's Destiny. Can you tell us what the destiny is?
Well, in this particular book, it's the destiny of successfully becoming part of the 101 range. Ultimately, knowing where the story is going and what my publisher has said to me, he describes the overall story as a blend of Lonesome Dove and the TV show Dallas.
Uh-huh.
So obviously, part of the destiny is that Charlie's a big dreamer, and the lady that comes into his life is as well. And part of the story is going to be their walk through life together.
Well, I was thinking the destiny was the marriage.
Well, I can't argue. Honestly, Ed, I can't argue that point. That's a very valid point. It really is. Well, at a few of my book signings on my tours, especially ladies now, although there was at least a couple of gentlemen too, but several ladies came up to me and said, well, we got the book, we were excited about it, we thought it was going to be a Western, and it was, Joe, it was, but it's a romance. I said, well, there's definitely some romance to it.
No,
and I said,
it's a romance. It could be published by any of the romance publishers.
I don't have a problem with that, frankly.
No, I understand.
And even my wife will tell you that of the two of us, I'm the romantic.
Well, good. Somebody's got to be stable.
You bet.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your writing process, and you've already alluded to it, but give us the path to publishing. How did you get to the publisher? Do you have an agent? All the technical nitty-gritty.
Okay. Well, number one, I do not have an agent. I'm my own agent.
Yeah.
Okay. But when I decided to start to write, the first story that I wrote was a story about me meeting my hero, Mickey Mantle, as a youth, and then meeting him again.
Yeah, he was an Oklahoma guy, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. And he was my hero. He was my hero. I loved baseball. I played baseball, was offered a contract by the Braves out of high school, but I ended up going to Oklahoma State on another scholarship. But at any rate, my point is, Mickey was always a big part of my life. And I met him at age 14 in Kansas City, Missouri, at a Kansas City Athletic, not Oakland, Kansas City Athletic, and New York Yankee game. And Mickey spent a considerable amount of time with me, introduced me to all the Yankees of the 1962, Roger Maris, Yogi Berra, Whitey Ford. I mean, the list of Hall of Famers is amazing. And in age 22, 8 years later, I'm managing a store in Lubbock, Texas. This is pre-Air Force. And Mickey opens a restaurant. I go to the grand opening. He recognizes me upon seeing me
Oh, that's terrific.
and calls me by name. That story started me off. The next story that I wrote was about the 9/11 and how it had impacted me. Well, I was Air Force at the time, civil servant by that time, and I did have an absolute 9/11 story, and I wrote it to be part of an anthology that's called New Mexico Remembers 9/11. The publisher of that was the publisher of the anthology. That same publisher I also met at a conference, and he gave me an idea of where the Mickey Mantle story might be able to be published. Turns out it was, and that was the first time out of 5 times that story has been published. It's a short story,
Yeah.
but it's had various different links based on newspapers, magazines, and whatever. But at any rate, that's how I met my publisher, and I actually, through meeting him and just talking to him, and he learning about me and me him, we decided that we'd be a team, and of course he knew. The latter part of that conversation was me sharing with him what I had written about Kelly Can.
Yep. That's interesting. Well, from the earlier question you asked me about the writing, how much do you write daily? And I'm really leading into a question of how long did it take you start to finish with Cowboy Destiny?
Okay. If my life is normal, and over the since in the fall I had 2 bouts with COVID, and that kind of wiped out September and November, and then I've lost a friend first part of January, and so helping and being supporting the widow changed a lot of that month. But let's just say that if it's a normal time, I would spend 4 hours minimum to as much as 8 to 10 hours, depending on the story and where I'm at and what I need to do and so forth. And I'm not talking about deadlines to the publisher. I'm talking about how the story is impacting me, and I need to get this on the page, kind of thing. But the morning works best for me, and so I get up, have a cup of coffee. I maybe go even read my paper first, but I sit down and I do something called my morning pages. Ed, I don't know if you ever heard of that term, but there's a wonderful artist that lives in Santa Fe, formerly lived in Taos, and she teaches a course on creativity, and as it applies to writing, which she's a writer. She sits down and has a short period of time where she just writes what's on her mind. It may be her summarizing the previous day or what she's going to do that day, or it may be where she is in a story or whatever. She says that happens to me every day. I have to have that period of time just to get my brain going. And I remember when I heard this said that I've heard this for the first time, there was a giggle. And then she says, to tell you the truth, there's been some mornings I just started writing. I don't have a clue what I need to be putting on this page today, but I'm going to just keep writing and maybe something will pop into my brain. And she said, I got to the bottom of the first page and said, maybe this isn't my best day, but at least I wrote my morning pages.
Yeah.
But anyway, that is what a normal day would be. I put that 400,000 words together over about a 4 to 5 month period during COVID. I couldn't go anywhere, and I got started on the story, and it just flowed. And so I did anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 words a day for day after day after day after day. And all of a sudden, here I was sitting at 400,000 words, and I had a story to work with. Now, is Cowboy's Destiny exactly the way it was when I looked at the beginning of the story? No, we moved some stuff around and added here and did this, and took some stuff away. But fundamentally, A Cowboy's Destiny is where the Charlie Kelly story starts. And it was, that part of the story was primarily written in the summer of 2020. It was published.
Well, with such a prolific production, 400,000 words, you could add another couple of 100,000 and write War and Peace.
Yeah, I wish I could say you're the first person that's ever said that. Because I don't know whether to take that as something good or something bad.
No, it just means that you could write an epic story. I mean, it might be a Western, but it would be, an epic story.
Well, by the time I get the story told that's in my mind right now, I would end up taking Charlie and Susan, his wife, and they would become parents, which they're not. Even now, where I'm at in the story, where I'm at now, they still haven't had kids. They would have kids, grandkids. I could take them into the 1950s, because I have in my mind already things that should happen and would happen to them. And so I guess, what is it? Tony Hillerman wrote 17 Joe Lee Porn Jim Chi novels. Well, I guess I could write 17 Charlie Kelly, Susan Kelly novels. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't know. I don't know if I could get a publisher to do that, but
No, that's a very interesting point. And the Tony Kellerman is a very interesting example, because he found a formula that worked, and he stayed with it.
Yeah, and he had some very interesting stories to tell, and I will tell you something that he is known for, and that is that he did his research, and when he included a location or a period of time or whatever, he did the best job he could. And I saw you doing it in the Forever Sheriff too. Do the best job you can to, when you're talking about a location, describe it accurately. When you're talking about a period of time, don't put a Z28 Camaro,
Right.
in 1917 or whatever,
Yeah. No, that's actually, your observation is an interesting problem that probably every Western writer has, because there are a lot of fans of guns, and guns are very much model centered. So, you got to get it right, or somebody's going to send you an email or a letter or something.
So true. So true.
Well,
I will tell you something else that I could have asked you, and I'll just share it from my point. I did want to write about my granddad's story on the 101, but I've also always felt that the period of, let's say, from 1900 to 1940 or something like that, was a period that I know, because I was living in Oklahoma in this later than that, and we still had cowboys and a lot of other stuff. You don't see a lot of authors writing about 1920. They're all writing about 1880.
Yeah,
And that's okay. And that's
no,
okay. But
yeah, I agree with you. Unfortunately, a lot of that is caused by publishers. I mean, Five Star had absolutely firm dates that they were dealing with in terms of what was frontier publishing, etc. And you're right, that was one of the battles I had with them, because I firmly believe that the 20th century values that we all grew up with were those that were forged in the 19th century. So if you wrote about the 20th century, you were really doing something that was an homage to the 19th century. It didn't sell them, don't get me wrong. I didn't win with my argument.
well, I will tell you, my granddad, my Uncle Richard, other members of the family, but especially my granddad, he would often state that there was a cowboy code, a cowboy way of living. And he said, you'll hear slightly different versions, but I know the version that I grew up with was a cowboy's word is his bond, his handshake's as good as a contract, and he has his buddies back.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I personally would like to expand that to Western or Westerner, you know.
Yes, yes.
And in one of my books, one of my characters says, we're not cowboys, we're Westerners.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And anyway, it's a good theme. Krista, we're coming up on 5 minutes before the hour, so I wonder if we should give you a chance to get in here, or what?
Yeah, thanks so much. This has just been a great conversation. I feel like I'm just sitting right in the room with you guys.
Good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's so great to have just that conversation between two writers, and that's what we wanted. So we don't have the chat option available on this particular video, so I don't have any questions from the audience, but we will have it opened up as soon as the video ends. So if we want to look at the chats after that's done, we welcome you to do that. And we are if you missed, so if you logged in late or started watching late, the whole entire video will be available to watch at any time. And we welcome you always to like and share the video. And we will have another author talk. It's always the last Tuesday of the month, and we'll be announcing the two authors coming up soon. And I really want to thank Barrett Rezak. He is our technical director at Blue Cottage, and Janelle Madison, who is our publicist and social media guru. And with that, I wish you both just a lovely evening. Yeah.
Did you post our contact information in case anybody wants to contact us, or at least an email address?
Yeah, it's on it's the website. So they could just go to your website and then through the contact form on your website. So
okay,
yes.
So and they've got, a link to the website's posted. Okay.
Yes. So the website, is listed in there. And then Joe and Ed's books are available where all fine books are sold. We, of course, love local independent bookstores are our absolute favorite. So pick your local independent favorite bookstore, and any bookstore can order their books in. And feel free to reach out to the authors on their websites. They have wonderful blogs. We've got tours coming up and some special events. So we look forward to seeing you out on the roads. And with that, I wish you both just a wonderful evening. And thank you again so much for taking your time to have this discussion.
Thank you very much.
And have a wonderful evening.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Joe.
Thank you, Ed. I look forward to seeing you in South Dakota.
Yeah, I'll see you. Well, I will see you in Albuquerque too. Okay,
yes,
great.
Yes, you will.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.